Superstars of Swift, this is Prof. G, and in this lesson we're going to catch 'em all by writing a routine to load over 1,000 plus Pokemon with a single button click. And we're going to learn to do this using a concept called recursion, a computer science topic that sometimes flusters new students, but it's actually not too hard to understand, especially when applied in a scenario like loading all available JSON pages. Let's learn big! Now, in order to load all of our creatures, let's add a button that says Load All to the bottom toolbar on the left. This means we want a new toolbar item in the toolbar, so I'm going to copy the one that I've already created, paste it above, make sure you're still inside of the curlies for the toolbar modifier. I'm going to delete the text view, and I'm going to replace it with a basic button view with a title key and an action. And I'll change the title to the string Load All, that'll be the label for the button, and I'll clear out the button action for now. And there's another thing that we notice, we have the Load All button, which is also sort of in the center of our bottom bar, and that's because both of the placements are dot status, so we want to change the topmost placement to bottom bar. That'll start putting any non-status items off to the left. Nice. Now it's time to write a routine to load all available JSON pages so we can see all of our Pokemon. But before we do that, let's talk recursion. Now, in computer science, a recursive function is one that will repeatedly call itself until completion, meaning when it gets the result it needs. Now, oftentimes this is taught in programming classes by coding a Fibonacci sequence. And I'll be straight with you. When I was in industry, I worked for a Fortune 50 firm before getting my PhD. I never once coded a Fibonacci sequence. Now, it's not a very practical example, although ironically, now I teach a physical computing course, and Fibonacci sequences can be really useful for creating cool patterns with LED lights, but the vast majority of professional programmers will never once code a Fibonacci sequence. But you may very well code a routine that gets all pages of data that are available, and we'll do that now using recursion. Here's how it's going to work. To load all the pages of JSON, we're going to write a function called loadAll that will first load a page. Then it will call itself, which will load the next page. Then it will call itself again, which will load the next page, doing this over and over again until we hit the last page. And when do we know we've done that? Well, we mentioned in the previous lesson, that's when the URL string no longer contains a valid URL. So once we're done, any open function calls will unwind, and our functions are done, and we've got the result we want. So let's code this up. And like our getData function, we're going to put our loadAll function inside of our creatures class. Now, just before the closing curly in the class, we'll create a function func loadAll, open and close parens, open and close curlies, but this function is going to be calling an asynchronous function. See, we're going to call getData up here. That's an async function, and any function that calls an async function also needs to be marked with the keyword async. So down in loadAll, we'll add the keyword async just before the closing curly. Then let's start out by writing the condition that will stop the recursion. So we'll say guard URL string dot has prefix, in parentheses passing in the string HTTP. If we don't have that prefix, then what we want to do is we want to return. So we'll say else, and we can put this all on one line, in between curlies, return. When that's happened, we've hit the last page. We no longer have another URL to load, so we're done. But if this condition is met, the guard lets us through, and we want to call getData. Now remember, getData is also an async function. What do we need to do? The same thing we did with URL session up here. We need to preface this with the keyword await. Again, that's because we're calling an async function, and this is going to get the next page of data. So still in loadAll, we'll say await getData, open and close parens. After we're done with this, we want to call loadAll again. That's the recursion part, and it's going to stop when we've got all of the data when the guard condition is no longer met. Remember, because loadAll is an async function, well, we've got to preface the call of that with the keyword await. But we need to do one more thing, and this is tricky because Swift no longer warns us about thread issues that we introduced in the prior lesson. So since we're looking at the URL string and we're making calls to get data repeatedly, we want to make sure that these all occur on the main thread. That means we've got to enclose all of these items in this function in a task block with main actor in set. Now, when you're done with this lesson, you can come back here and remove the task block, but keep the statements inside of it and rerun your code, and you'll likely see that the code hangs after just a page or two. Now, it's tough to remember to do this. Hopefully, Apple will provide some better warnings in a future version of Xcode, but for now, I'm just going to start right after the loadAll function definition, adding task, capital T, with curlies, and after the task line, add @main actor, upper camel case, followed by the keyword in, and then I'm going to cut out the 3 lines and paste them in the task main actor block. And that, my friends, is it. Not too complex. Let's head back over to our creatures list view and call this. Now we're going to call this in the button action, but if we try to just do a straight up call, we're going to run into a problem because we're working with an asynchronous function. See, if we call creatures.loadData, it says async up here. Now we'll accept this, but we get an error. It says async call function that does not support concurrency. But we know how to fix this. We just wrap this call in task, capital T, and in between its curlies, we'll put in this call. But we need to do one more thing. We need to add the await keyword because we're calling an async function. So let's test this out. Now I could click load all in live preview, but instead I'm going to build and run in the simulator. This will have the call to each page printed out down below in the console, and we can also check the console to make sure we don't get any error messages. So here we go. Time to catch them all. Click on that load all button. We see our progress indicator, and we've loaded them all. Bottom bar status says 1302 of 1302 creatures, mission accomplished. Look down below, we see every single URL printed out for the URL session we call using that URL. Nice! And we can scroll all the way to the end and see the last Pokemon. So there he is, we caught them all, and we can see the URL for that creature detail is showing in the console. That last one showed up when we called a get data on our creature detail, looking good. Now if I click around in here, especially if I click on this swimming guy, 1291, I'm going to see that I don't have an image that loads, and I also get a JSON error down in the console. Now this doesn't crash my app, we gracefully deal with any errors in our app, but in the next lesson I'm going to show you how we can add a placeholder if we try to access an image and there's no image to show. And we'll get an even higher quality image. But Swifter, I hope you're feeling pretty good about your skills. You just mastered recursion. Continue to hack.